One by one, they emerged from the shadows to stand just before the edge of each tunnel. All looked down from their elite heights, not upon Imala, who was still kneeling before the hot spring. Claire heard the whispers first. Like that time in the chamber when this voice first addressed them, they filled the humidity with their sound. Though, when she looked up, targeting each of them in turn, none of their lips were moving. This was something he had been doing all this time. The voice. Yet the community was there, all staring at her. Had the voice told them? Did it converse with Teak in some secret way? After all, she had been the one who took Civi's life. Some of their expressions were blank. Some were scowling. There were those who were smirking at her. How much did they know? Dressed in shabby clothing, the heads of few were covered with shawls. Underneath, seen through the rips and holes in the fabric, their bodies were wrapped in what looked like thick gauze. Teak had chosen a more gaudy way to hide his ghostly limb from the public. How much were these people hiding? "You, summoner," the voice began, "have not committed to the first ring, but Samson's woman has. The glimmer was there the moment he started her upon this path. Now she has stepped deep into the rings. Like he, she will not be able to withdraw without completing them. It's like a craving. The first taste condemns one to this decision." Claire ignored the looks from the community and found Imala again among the shadows at the top of the tiny mountain. How would her ex-comrade respond to this news? If it was true, Claire wouldn't have been able to stop her from the beginning. Imala had been driven to find this place. "So," the voice continued, "what to do now? Leave her and save yourself? Or will you commit to your role as her second and see the rituals to the end?" Still watching for Imala's response, Claire answered, "No matter what, we're prisoners, huh?" "If you want someone to blame for your fate," the voice responded with a chuckle, "then blame Samson. Although we of the community do not see this as a prison sentence, we all have accepted the sacrifice of time and reputation for this, because we know the woes of these final moments of our lives won't compare to the new life to come." "Easy for you to say," Claire said, and scanned the faces of the community. "She becomes like you, and then what of me? Am I the last sacrifice? Only moments ago you had offered my life to her cause." "You have forgotten everything I said about you being a summoner," the voice responded. "When you call upon the elements, you are bringing something from beyond. You already have that connection, just like Samson." Claire had been watching the faces of the community members as the voice spoke, hoping to find which one of them it was that had been speaking all this time. When her search ended without making this discovery, and it was time for her response, she said, "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying," the voice continued, "that Samson achieved what he did despite the rings." Claire's jaw went slack. "You didn't know." Looking the community members in the eyes, she said, "You didn't know there was another way until he—" There was silence from the voice. None of the members said a word either. "You want it," Imala spoke up, drawing the chamber's attention. Still staring at the edge of the hot spring, she added, "You want his knowledge. All you know are the rings." "You said all Imala saw was a projection," Claire scoffed. "Was that a lie?" "You want us as bait," Imala muttered. The chamber vibrated with the voice's chuckle. "Already you have forgotten. Whether or not you are a part of us, he will have to come back to finish the rings." Claire wondered if that was really true. You act as if you have so much to lose, the voice continued. Claire snorted. Yeah, says the one who won't show his face. How far have you gone with it? Afraid we'll get one look at you and we'll... She was cut off by a low chuckle. Facing forward again, her ghostly knives still pointing in Taek's direction. Even though her cloak was still enclosed about his head, he stood composed near the chamber's entrance. His voice filtered through the cloak's fabric, but he wasn't aiming his face in her direction. His head was tilted back slightly, and he had turned to point his face toward the top of the tiny mountain. Claire jerked her attention up there. Had she missed something? Was Imala? All the faces of the community members came to life. Each of them was smiling. Their shoulders bounced, their chests heaved, or their stomachs rumbled as they all joined in with Taek and chuckled at Claire's expense. The only one who wasn't laughing, she realized, was the voice. What are you talking about? It eventually asked, while the chamber rumbled with the collective laughter. You've looked upon me ever since you entered the temple. You look upon me even now. Claire darted her eyes about the faces of the community members. Was the voice using some type of arcane art to mask himself? He never explained which art he studied. Surely, though, there was one that could project a person's voice without them even moving their mouth. How else would I have been able to touch the both of you before? The voice asked. Instead of responding to his questions, Claire kept watching the community members' faces, listening to the voice echo off the walls, trying to find its point of origin. Still don't get it? The voice asked. Allow me to indulge. You thought I would be a horror to look upon, but rest assured, it is quite the opposite. Her stomach sank as her head swam when the ceiling ascended. She wobbled, thinking the floor was falling. Going into a squat, she lost her grip upon the blade in her right hand. It fizzled away as she pressed her palm into the wet stone underneath her, trying to gain her balance. The air fluttered her long, parted bangs, drawing her gaze upward. Streams of moisture were being pulled into the fog. The bottom layer raced higher, shrinking inward. I'll give you a glimpse, the voice chuckled. Though it echoed off the surrounding walls, there was no mistaking where it was coming from now. Bundled together, the fog distributed parts of it in several directions. Toward the front of the chamber, it rounded off. Over the hot spring, it chiseled down to a dull point. On the left and right, small protrusions rounded themselves off. Directly in the middle, a shape dropped down, reached its desired size, and then expanded toward the front of the chamber. It stopped where two areas rose upward, forming holes. Below the central shape, the fog broke as though cut with a blade. The ends of this indentation curved toward the two holes. These were all hints, Claire understood. Mere suggestions of what this person's face looked like. If I must show myself, the voice thundered, the large mouth moving with each word, then the least I could do is give you something with context, something familiar. The wind swirled about as exhalations for the voice's speech. Both Claire and Imala were gripping upon the stone below them to anchor themselves in place. But believe me, the face continued, this is but one form I can take on. As I am now, my limits coincide with my imagination. You are, Imala whispered, beyond. It was no wonder Claire saw what she did when entering the chamber with the first hot spring. How Imala claimed all those wisps of moisture and the roiling fog settled over the pool had been Samson. It was for Imala's benefit, since she hadn't achieved what he had. You lied to them, Asham, someone called out into the chamber. Claire looked toward the top of the tiny mountain. Imala gasped, dropping her gaze back to the edge of the hot spring just out of reach. Both she and Claire recognized that voice. The giant face, as well as all of the community members, targeted the hot spring. "That you, Samson?" the face questioned. The water spewed forth, sending a jet of light upward. It slanted to aim toward the center of the chamber ceiling, toward the middle of the giant face. When struck, the expression remained as the whole shape sunk inward and twisted into itself. The jet of light hit the ceiling above and scattered into a spray of embers. The face was gone, but the fog was spreading out and tumbling down the chamber walls. "What good will that do?" the voice chuckled. The falling embers were landing along the slope of the tiny mountain. Claire, as well as many of the community members, were drawn back to the hot spring at the top. There, standing in the space Imala couldn't pass, was the shape of a person. At first, Claire thought it was an elemental, one made of air, but she knew Samson didn't summon humanoids to aid him. It was looking toward the top of the chamber, cradling Imala in its arms. "You can't deny the call, Samson," the fog stated with confidence. The humanoid didn't respond. Instead, it lowered its head, turned it, and looked down at Claire. Sharing its gaze, seeing how Imala was awestruck by its presence, just like the face in the fog, not all the features were perfectly in place. Still, though, she knew who it was. It looked away, targeting one of the tunnels along the right side of the chamber. "Traitor!" one of the female community members shouted. "Who lied to who?" another member demanded. The humanoid figure ignored their jeers. Bending in a slight hunch, it then launched from the side of the tiny mountain. Soaring upward as a jet of air, it raced toward the tunnel it targeted before. The community member standing there reared their left arm back, their hand being totally engulfed in flames. They then flung it forward to collide with the body of air. Either element met right before the tunnel in a swirl of fiery tongues and a gale of wind. The flames blew out, and the wind entered the tunnel, crashing into the community member. Knocking them backward, the air disappeared into the shadowed depths. "We know these depths the same as you," the voice laughed, as many of the other members turned about to slip away into their chosen tunnel. There were some who stayed. They quickly focused their attention upon Claire. She heard Taek's muffled growls, and saw him pulling at the cloak still wrapped about his head. Taking a second to target the closest tunnel, seeing that it was occupied by one of the community members, she turned back to Taek. Her cloak leapt from his head, yanking him forward. Caught off guard by the sudden move, he fell onto the chamber floor just as the cloak zipped in Claire's direction. When it reached her, it swirled about her body, starting at her feet and going upward, tightening into an elongated shape, concealing her within. Still moving, it continued upward, leaving the chamber floor and curving through the air. Heading for the tunnel she decided on moments before, it kept its shape as it spun like a projectile. The community member standing at the mouth of that tunnel watched it coming, but he didn't attempt to move out of the way. The cloak entered the tunnel just to the left of his head. He uttered a small chuckle right before it dashed into the shadows behind him. The gusts that were whipping up because of the cloak's trajectory arrived, slamming into him. He closed his eyes and held his breath, shuffling back a step from the collision. The tunnel then howled as the gusts bounced off its walls, exploring the depths beyond.